Hey, welcome back to Table Talk Podcast. This is Caleb. I'm here with David. It is a really nice Tuesday afternoon outside. Very sunny, kind of warm. Sat outside and read for a little bit. It's a great day.
It is. It is a super nice day out. I think we're going to end up in the mid 60s, mid to upper 60s. It is Tuesday afternoon, and we're ready. I've got my cup of coffee. You know, last week it was because it was morning. This one is because it's afternoon.
It's afternoon, right? I mean,
so I had my morning coffee. Now I need my afternoon coffee.
I almost made one. I settled for a little tiny bottle of water instead, but I might have to get a coffee after this.
Look at you, Mr. Healthy.
Yeah, you should have seen the burger I put down for lunch. Need about the picture of health. I have one, so I tried my best, to only eat out one day a week for lunch. But there are a couple places that I can't say no to. So when someone says Nick and Jay's, it's just the fail safe of oh, I can't.
They know they've got you.
I can't not say yes to that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What'd
you get?
I didn't go as crazy.
Okay.
Usually I get this thing called the brownstone they have there, which is burger, onion ring on top of it, bacon, barbecue sauce. And it's just so freaking good.
8,000
I probably shouldn't have said freaking on this podcast, but you guys, it's all in love here, right? Yeah. It's so good. But today I just got a regular bacon cheeseburger.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, look, good choices.
Yeah. Good choices that are going to hurt in 2 hours.
Definitely choices.
Yeah, choices were made. That's funny because we talked about choices
Look
this
at
week
that.
during the
what
sermon.
A transition.
I know. My heart, unfortunately, will probably stop after what I ate for lunch today. So we don't have a lot of room to talk about heart this afternoon.
Yep. I think this is a great, as we exit talking about our vision and things like that, we're kind of moving into what we see as what God's desires are for us, right? What what can happen with our relationship with God when we put our trust in Him, and the health, not just our physical health, right? You may not, your heart may stop because you ate a brownstone, and that may be something that you got to think about or whatever.
Yeah.
But God talks about being healthy in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And this week you kicked this all in series with the heart.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of what we're looking at is the Shema, the prayer that God gives the people in kind of the commandment that He gives them in Deuteronomy to love Him with all their heart, their soul, their mind, and their strength. And then Jesus expands that later on and includes loving our neighbors as ourselves. And as we've talked about wholeness, as we've talked about shalom, this is where we think we find that. When we are able to love God with everything we have, our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength, and love the people around us as ourselves, that's when I think we can really start to experience the wholeness He created us for and live into it. And so, it was fun to kick that off this week with the heart.
Yeah. Well, so important, and one that I think is one that can get left behind when you're talking about all of these, because it feels like so much would be physical health, or me understanding, having for me, I'm going to lean pretty heavily into the information part, mind, right? And there can be times where I think you can leave the heart part of it out. And you used a great example this week with David and Bathsheba.
Oh, yeah.
Right? David and Bathsheba.
Yeah.
So, and a little bit, could you talk a little bit about that story and why, what does that have to do with loving the Lord with all of your heart?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Hebrew word for heart is lev, and lev kind of goes beyond what our culture calls our heart. Often it's just the seat of romantic affection or something like that. In Hebrew thinking, the lev, the heart, is where our emotions spring out of. It's where our desires and our affections spring out of. And ultimately, it's where our wisdom and our choices spring out of. It does sustain our life physically, but it is kind of the seat of our emotions and our wisdom and our choices. And, there's so much warning in the Scripture about, hey, guard your heart. The heart is corruptible. There's also so many positive things about the heart, too, that it's this place of great joy and wisdom and overflowing. So it's important. And when we come to David, what we see with King David is that David was called a man after God's own heart, which I think when you understand kind of that full concept, it's not just he loved people, he did, but his wisdom, his affections, his desires, the things that he kind of centered his life around reflected God's. But David was a human like the rest of us, and his heart could be corrupted. And that's kind of exactly what happened. You see this story after he comes to power, sort of rules, where he takes Bathsheba. He notices her bathing on a roof. He's out on the palace overlooking the city, notices her, brings her in, sleeps with her. The text doesn't tell us that Bathsheba has much of a choice in that. And essentially, to cover it up, sends her husband to the front lines of the war to be killed. And then he takes her in to be one of his wives. It's a messy story. It's a story that, as we read later on Sunday in Psalm 51, David is broken by the weight of what he's done. And it's a story that shows us, I think, that even the person who is supposed to be closest to God, the king of Israel, their heart can be corrupted. And so there's this warning for us in that we have to protect our hearts and make sure that we're praying and seeking God's heart to align our heart with it. And that's why we kind of ended praying Psalm 51, asking God to create clean hearts in us. And that's sort of been the challenge for this whole week, is like pray this prayer at least once a day for the week, just to kind of keep that at the front of our minds.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. With that story, when I think about that whole story with David, what's interesting is our sin can trick us. Mm-hmm. Our sin can trick us into not even seeing our own sin, not even seeing where our hearts are, where they're deceiving us,
right.
or where it's off from what God wants us to do, and what. And David, after doing all of that, I don't even think he really even recognized it,
right? Exactly.
Until Nathan, the disciple or the prophet comes and tells him about it, and then his heart is broken, and things. And for me, that is while it's sad and it's hard and it's even a little scary, for me, it's also comforting to be like, okay, David was a man after God's own heart. Yeah, he made all these mistakes. He did things that are terrible. Yet God still loved him. God still had a heart for God. Right. And I think a big part of that is being open and understanding, like, hey, I made a mistake, and being willing to hear other people, and when your heart's not in the right place, turning and correcting that.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I said Sunday, was that, one of the things that I love about David is how quickly he is able to say, I was wrong. And it did take Nathan. But you know what? I don't want to pick on him too bad, because I think sometimes in my life it's taken someone else to come to me and say, you were wrong.
100%.
And so there's something to be said about being thankful for that, having those people in our lives that we'll listen to. But yeah, it is comforting. It doesn't whitewash the mistakes, but it is comforting to know that, okay, here's this dude that did something that's pretty messed up. Yeah. And I think we can all say it was pretty messed up. Mm-hmm. Even the text says God was displeased, but God still blessed him and cared for him and loved him. There were consequences 100%. For what David did. If you read the rest of 2 Samuel and even go down into post David's life, his family becomes a mess. Like there's infighting and war, and even kind of worse situations similar to this with Judah. I mean, it just gets pretty rough. Yeah. But his heart, he allows his heart to be broken before God. Yeah. And God blesses and restores him because he's able to do that.
Yeah, and God blesses him and restores him. He's, like you said, the consequences are not automatically erased. Yeah. And for this world, they're not automatically erased. And you feel bad for him, but then you also see, even as he gets older, there are things that I think, well, there's still weaknesses there. Yeah. And there are still lingering things from this whole situation where I think his heart is probably scarred, and he's struggling. He's probably trying to make it right in some ways with how he chooses his kids, how he treats his kids, and choosing ones over the other and stuff. I think he's almost overcompensating because of those sins.
Yeah.
And that just causes more
problems.
More problems.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is a consequence of when those things happen. I think of sin, and I think so many times people go, well, why, if I'm forgiven, you should just forget it, and it's never
Right.
there. And it's like, well, there are still consequences that hang around, and that at least on this earth, there are still consequences when we make mistakes and when we
Right.
do things like that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that God rejects you.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you're no longer one of God's chosen
Right.
children. That you're out of His plan.
Right.
When you notice it and you turn away from it,
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that He can use you even more.
Yeah.
Because of your story.
Yeah.
And that's something's beautiful about David is he has this story. He has so many ups and he has downs,
Mm-hmm.
and his story goes up and down all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we can see God's hand throughout the whole thing, and mostly because of where his heart is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the sign of someone having a heart like God's is not that they are perfect. It's not that they don't make mistakes. It's not that they don't sin even. But it is that their heart is in line with God, that when they do mess up, they do make an effort to turn from it and move back towards God's heart. Because if you're looking at trying to find somebody that's never made a mistake or never sinned, you won't, other than Jesus, right? You're not going to find that. But there are times perhaps where our hearts become hardened, and even when we become knowledgeable of our sin or our mistakes, we still resist and still turn away. I never see David's heart get hard. And I think that kind of makes the difference, right? I mean, we see other characters in Scripture whose hearts are hardened. God even says that his people's hearts are hardened at times. They become stiff-necked. They won't turn back to him. But in David, I think we see somebody who is willing to turn back to God, whose heart remains open to the heart of God. And so that's what it means to have a heart like God's. It just kind of means what you said, being open and honest and being willing to say, I screwed up, I was wrong, forgive me, I will change. There may be consequences here, but God, I know you'll still receive me, so please create that clean heart in me. Let me follow you better today.
Yeah, and I think that has applications in just to our different relationships that we're in. Like when I think of my marriage, and when Brittany corrects me on something, or if she sees something that I'm doing that's like, hey, that needs corrected. There are times that my first reaction is defense. I gotta be defensive.
Right.
I've got to make sure that I'm, show her that I'm the right one or whatever. But typically, and this is what I hope for is I come around and I hear what she's saying and I go, you're right. That was something that I need to correct. And I didn't see that short-sightedness.
Yeah.
I think she would say the same thing. And it's because I think there's initial reaction to something like that. But I think it's also how it's delivered too.
Right.
You see Nathan. He comes in with a story that, and he delivers it in a way that can be accepted.
Yeah.
So when someone's being corrected, if you're correcting somebody, make sure that you're doing it in a way that it can actually be received.
Yeah.
Because Nathan could have came in and said, no,
he would have been dead about 30 seconds later.
Yes, that's right. And because you get that initial reaction.
Yeah.
But the way he did it was gentle and kind and thoughtful, and he still called him out on the sin and on the mistake that he made.
Yeah.
But he did it in a way that David could hear it.
Yeah.
And that David could react.
Yeah, exactly. And we should have an interest in each other's hearts. We should have an interest in restoring each other's hearts. But you're exactly right. The tone with which we do it is crucial. And I think when you look at Jesus, I never see his tone getting mean or rude, or he gets angry. I mean, he gets angry with the religious leaders. He gets angry with the money changers in the temple. But even that, I have to imagine, was like the tone wasn't "I hate you" anger. It was this thing is hurting people anger.
Yeah.
Righteous
anger.
righteous. And so the tone we take as we try to help others kind of have their hearts restored matters. It also matters the tone we take with ourselves. I am really bad at this. I'll give you an example. So this past Thursday, I had a conference I had to go to. I was supposed to be somewhere at 7:20 a.m. I don't know if you know me very well. I don't see 7:20 a.m. very often. My alarm goes off at 7:30. Usually I lay around for a bit. I'm a person that is always up late and just can't go to sleep until late. And so I got to sleep a little later. I overslept. My alarm actually went off at 6:30. And my brain did not even recognize that I had to be somewhere. I was just like, my alarm, snooze, snooze, snooze. I woke up at 7:17 and realized, oh my gosh, I am late. And the first words I said to myself were not, oh man, it's okay, whatever, we'll fix it. The first words I said to myself were, stupid, stupid, stupid. No, I'm not even kidding. I mean, I'm literally rushing to my bathroom to brush my hair and brush my teeth, and I'm going, stupid, stupid. And God convicted me. It was like, why is that the tone you take with yourself? That's not the tone you would have taken with somebody else.
Yeah.
Why is that what you're doing to yourself? And part of that whole thing, I think, is I think maybe we're bent one way or the other. We can be really graceful with ourselves and really judgmental of other people, or it can be flipped, where we give a lot of grace to others, but we are so harsh with ourselves. And what I think Jesus is able to do is say, hey, you don't have to be harsh with anybody. I love you. I love them. I want to restore you gently and bring you back in line with my heart gently. And that's what he says. He's gentle and lowly in heart. Yeah. And so if we can trust that and follow that, I think our experience of turning away from our sin and aligning with him again is much more pleasant than if we take that mean-spirited, harsh, critical approach.
Yeah. Yep, I would say quick to admit your sin, and also quick to forgive.
Yeah.
Whether that's forgive them or forgive yourself. And
Yeah.
I think we see that out of Jesus. I think we see it often from him.
Yeah.
He's going to be one of the first people to say this is right, this is wrong. He's also going to be the first person that's there to forgive and to correct course and to love people how they need to be loved.
Yeah.
And I think he does that. I think he does that perfectly.
Yeah, he does. And that's why he's the perfect balance of grace and truth.
Sure.
He's able to be 100% grace and 100% truth. And that math doesn't math for humans, but it does when you're God in the flesh. And so trying to follow his example is crucial, even though we won't always do it perfectly.
So we're continuing this series. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, me too.
And so you covered heart this week. What do we have coming up?
Yeah, so this week we're looking at soul, which is really interesting because how we view soul is really influenced by more Greek and Western philosophy than Hebrew philosophy. And so we're going to get into that a little bit this week of like when Jesus uses the word soul, when the Shema uses the word, well, they didn't use the word soul, right? But when they use the word that we translate as soul, nephesh is the word in the Hebrew. What were they saying? What did they mean? And it goes so much further beyond just this kind of abstract, non-physical part of ourselves. It's really an encompassing of our whole being. And it's the place where we connect with God and the divine. So I'm excited to dive into that. I think it'll be fun. And we're going to do some history lessons between Greek and Hebrew thought, which I will love.
That sounds fun. The children will be doing that this week.
Cool.
We took 1 week for our March Madness.
Took a madness break.
Took a March Madness fun break where we talked about Jesus being our champion and how we can be champions with him. But then we're joining back in with this all-in series.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about on a simpler level when Jesus tells the Pharisees, calls them whitewashed tombs.
Yeah.
And how, hey, there's way more than just outward.
Right.
It has to be everything. It has to be your whole heart, soul, mind, strength. And so we're going to be digging in a little bit of that. And I think I'm excited about that for the kids. It's
going to be awesome. And I want to say too, like, I know part of this series, I think, has already stirred maybe some conversations. And so if that's something you're listening to this and you go, I need to talk to somebody, like, we're here. Like, please reach out. Like, we want to be on this journey with you. Like, we want to walk alongside you as you are kind of trying to figure out, how do I love God with everything that I am? How do I love him with my heart? What are some things keeping me from that? What do I have buried in my heart that might need to be brought to the surface? Same with soul, mind, strength as we get through those things. So we're here.
Yeah.
Reach out, call. We're here because we believe that Jesus wants wholeness for you, and walking down this path is, I believe, where we find it. None of us have perfectly achieved it. A lot of us have a long way to go. Me too. But we believe that's where Jesus wants us to go. Yeah. And so if that's something that you need or feel called to, reach out. We're here.
Yeah. And if we don't have the answers, we will point you towards people that we really believe will be able to help you and whatever that is, finances, with your relationship with God, questions about God, with physical stuff, physical needs or like we're here. I agree. So I think that's a great thing to point out and to let people know.
Cool. Well, seriously, we're around. Yell at us. We'd love to talk with you. And if we don't hear from you before then, we'll talk to you next week on Table Talk. Have a great week, guys.